Between what is said and not meant, and what is meant and not said, most of love is lost. Khalil Gibran, there is something hauntingly beautiful, yet infinitely tragic, about the way men and women relate to each other. It is a dance choreographed not merely by attraction or shared desire, but by centuries of myth, psychological conditioning, and unconscious longing. Like two celestial bodies caught in a gravitational pull, their orbits often never truly touch. They circle one another, close enough to feel the heat, yet distant enough to never fuse in clarity. Carl Jung did not offer shallow answers to the perennial question of gender misunderstanding. He offered depth, shadow, and uncomfortable truths. In his eyes, the problem was not that men and women are inherently incompatible, but that they meet each other through the veil of projection, an inherited distortion woven by the unconscious mind. This is not simply a case of said, she said. It is the deep psychological theater in which both genders are actors, unaware of the roles they've been assigned. Jung believed that the masculine psyche harbors an image of the feminine, what he called the Anima. This image is not derived from reality but from memory, emotion, myth, and maternal influence. It is not the woman herself who is loved, desired, or feared. It is the idea of her. And this idea is often burdened with expectations she never agreed to carry. A man in love may believe he has found his counterpart, his other half, as Plato once wrote. But he is rarely aware that he is not relating to a real person, he is relating to a symbolic representation of what he lacks. The woman becomes a stage upon which the drama of his inner world plays out. She is assigned the impossible role of being both divine and domesticated. Mysterious yet predictable, nurturing yet wild. And when she fails to meet this unconscious ideal, the man feels betrayed, not because she changed, but because his illusion broke. It is not the woman who disappoints, but the fantasy that dissolves. And this disillusionment can be devastating, not because she was false, but because the man never truly saw her to begin with. To understand why men often fail to see women clearly, one must first descend into the architecture of the unconscious. Jung's contribution to this inner landscape was profound. He taught us that a man's psyche contains an image of woman not formed by experience, but by an inherited collective blueprint, a living symbol he called the Anima. She is not a memory of a specific woman, nor is she a compilation of romantic failures. She is deeper than that. She is a vessel of feeling, intuition, and soulfulness, the embodiment of a man's own neglected or unconscious feminine qualities. The Anima is not static. In her immature forms, she appears in dreams and fantasies as seductive, moody, elusive, or idealized. As a man matures psychologically, this archetype evolves, revealing layers of emotional insight and creative sensitivity. But until a man consciously engages with her, she will dominate his perception of women in the outer world. He will project her onto the women he meets, believing he has found the one, when in fact he is merely confronting his own inner yearning. This is not love. It is projection masquerading as intimacy. A man might be captivated by a woman's voice, her mannerisms, her stillness or vitality, but what he is responding to is the resonance she has with his Anima. She fits the mold of something unconscious, something half-remembered, something that promises healing without pain. She becomes the echo of his unspoken needs, the mother he wanted, the lover he idealized, the muse he longed for. And yet, when the real woman fails to live up to the symbolic expectations, when she reveals her complexity, her flaws, her autonomy, disillusionment sets in. The fantasy cannot survive reality. What once felt divine now feels difficult. The man feels deceived, though the only deceiver was his own psyche. He may accuse her of changing, of hiding, of becoming cold, when in truth he is simply encountering a human being who never matched his ideal in the first place. This projection is not malicious. It is instinctual, unconscious, deeply human. But it is also dangerous, for it replaces connection with illusion. Until a man reclaims the Anima from the outer world and begins to dialogue with her within himself, he will remain trapped in a cycle of idealization and disappointment. The misunderstanding between men and women is not merely a modern dilemma. It is an ancient inheritance rooted in myth, religion, and centuries of symbolic storytelling. The feminine has always been more than flesh and bone. It has been an image, a symbol, a vessel onto which cultures, tribes, and individuals projected their deepest desires, fears, and ideals. Jung called these powerful symbols archetypes, and few are as enduring as the image of the eternal feminine. From the sirens of Homer's epics to the virgins and vixens of medieval lore, woman has been portrayed not as a complex being, but as a paradox, sacred and profane, healer and destroyer, muse and monster. These depictions did not arise arbitrarily. They were psychological necessities, built by a world in which the feminine was both revered and feared. And in these contradictions, men were taught not to know woman, but to worship or protect themselves from her. The Madonna whore complex, which Freud named but Jung more deeply understood, is not just a neurotic tendency. It is an archetypal wound. Man, confronted by the unknown aspects of the feminine, splits her into dual figures: the nurturing, pure woman who redeems and the dangerous, sensual woman who tempts. This fragmentation is not only unfair to women, it cripples the man's ability to form whole, truthful relationships. He cannot love completely because he sees incompletely. Over time, these archetypes solidified into expectations. Woman must be soft but not too soft, independent but not too independent, emotional but only in ways that soothe the masculine ego. In her failure to conform to these conflicting ideals, she is often labeled as confusing. But it is not confusion, it is complexity. Jung knew that man's inner anima was shaped by such historical and cultural forces, and thus, the modern man, unaware of this inheritance, finds himself frustrated. He seeks in women something eternal, mythic, something that no human being can fully embody. She must be a living metaphor. When she refuses this role, when she lives for herself, speaks from her own voice, loves without submission, she is misunderstood. Not because she is unclear, but because the man is still searching for an archetype, not a person. The echoes of history still murmur in our modern relationships. They whisper into our expectations, into our judgments, into our longing. Beneath the surface of masculine misunderstanding lies something deeper than ignorance. It is fear. Not loud, aggressive fear, but a subtle, haunting discomfort. It is the unease a man feels in the presence of something he cannot define, predict, or control. And no force in the psyche embodies that mystery more than the feminine. Carl Jung understood that what a man fears in woman is not woman herself, but the parts of his own nature she awakens. His emotional fluidity, his intuitive knowing, his vulnerability, his chaos. These are not inherently feminine traits, but they are traits the masculine world has historically denied, suppressed, or ridiculed. And so, when a woman reflects these qualities, she becomes the target of projection. He may call her irrational, overly emotional, or unstable. But what he truly fears is his own shadow. This fear is amplified when a man has not done the inner work of confronting his emotional wounds, particularly those shaped by early relationships. If a man grew up in an environment where sensitivity was punished, where tears were seen as weakness, or where the maternal figure was absent or overwhelming, his inner world becomes imbalanced. He may strive for controlled dominance or emotional detachment, not because these are his true nature, but because they protect him from the parts of himself he never learned to hold. The feminine in both women and within himself threatens this fragile structure. She is fluid, ever-changing, intuitive, unpredictable. She speaks in moods, symbols, and silences. And when he encounters her, whether in a partner or a passing interaction, he is faced with a mirror. She reflects not who he is, but who he has refused to become. Jung believed that the goal of psychological development, the path to individuation, was not to become more masculine or feminine, but to become whole. That means a man must not only embrace the rational, linear, and structured aspects of himself, but also the feeling, receptive, and nonlinear dimensions. This is not softness. This is strength refined through truth. Until a man integrates these sound aspects, the feminine will always feel like a threat. Not because she is dangerous, but because she is powerful. And because power, when not understood, becomes frightening. In a city once washed by the golden dust of ancient wisdom, there lived a philosopher. His days were spent in contemplation, scribbling dense thoughts on parchment, asking questions the world had grown tired of answering. He believed in reason and structure, in the supremacy of mind over matter. To him, life was a problem to be solved, a series of logical riddles awaiting resolution. One evening, while passing through the marketplace at dusk, he heard music, not the kind sung by the lyre or etched in theory, but music that moved through bodies, through silence, through air. It was then that he saw her. A dancer. She was not classically beautiful, but she possessed something rare, presence. She moved not with precision, but with freedom, as if each gesture was born in that very moment, never rehearsed, never to be repeated. The philosopher was spellbound. He had spent his life understanding the world, and yet, here stood a woman who made him feel something beyond understanding. He began to visit her performances regularly, watching from the shadows, taking mental notes, believing that with enough observation, he could decode her essence. They met eventually. He spoke to her in long, winding sentences filled with abstraction and metaphor. She listened with gentle eyes but responded with few words. Her presence made him nervous, for it lacked predictability. She smiled when he expected stillness and fell silent when he expected words. Over time, he tried to change her, gently at first. He asked her to dance slower, to explain her movements, to follow his rhythm instead of her own. She refused, not out of rebellion, but from truth. One night, as they sat beneath an olive tree under a moonless sky, she turned to him and said, "You do not love me. You love what I mean to you." The philosopher said nothing. Her words shattered something he hadn't known he'd built, a dream, an idea, a myth disguised as love. She rose as gracefully as ever, and left him there, not in bitterness, but in mercy, and so the philosopher returned to his solitude. But he was no longer the same man. He no longer wrote with certainty. He no longer spoke in absolutes. Something within him had broken, but in its breaking, something deeper stirred. Carl Jung once wrote that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration, by making the darkness conscious. And nowhere is this more essential than in the relationship between a man and his inner feminine, the Anima. For as long as she remains hidden, unrecognized, and unclaimed, she will dominate him from the shadows, distorting every relationship he enters, especially with women. Integration is not a romantic notion. It is a brutal task. It requires the man to confront the truth that the feminine he longs for out there exists first within. He must cease chasing completion in the outer world and instead turn inward, where the neglected parts of his soul lie buried beneath pride, repression, and inherited scripts. It is not enough to admire women, to pursue them, to possess or protect them. A man must meet the feminine in his own heart, with reverence, not fear. What does this integration look like? It begins when a man no longer flees from his emotional currents, when he allows himself to feel without judgment. It grows when he listens, not only to others but to his own intuition. It deepens when he expresses beauty, vulnerability, tenderness, and creative yearning, not as weakness, but as balance. These are not feminine traits, they are human ones. The Anima is not asking him to become womanly. She is calling him to become whole. Only then can he approach a woman as she truly is, not as a goddess to worship or a mystery to decode, but as another soul walking her own path. The man who has faced his Anima can look into the eyes of a woman without needing her to rescue him from his emptiness or validate his worth. He does not impose his unlived potential onto her, nor does he crumble when she fails to meet his fantasy. This kind of man does not seek to complete himself through relationship. He brings completion into it. And the relationship that forms from this space is not built on longing or projection. It is built on presence. It is not founded on illusion, but on shared humanity. The woman, no longer burdened with the impossible role of being everything, is finally free to be herself. There is a subtle tragedy that plays out in the emotional lives of many men, the inability to truly see a woman for who she is. Not because she hides herself, and not because he lacks intelligence or empathy, but because he is caught in the web of his own shadow. The feminine presence, especially when deeply felt, acts like a mirror. And what a man sees in that mirror is not her, it is himself. Carl Jung spoke often of the shadow, the denied, hidden, and repressed aspects of the self. These are not merely flawed strengths, unclaimed emotions, and neglected desires that we exile from consciousness. And for men, much of what is labeled feminine often ends up in this dark cellar. When a man fears softness, he hides his tenderness. When he fears abandonment, he hides his need. When he fears powerlessness, he hides his vulnerability. But the psyche has a way of bringing back what we abandon. It does so through projection, casting the shadow outward, and women, often being more emotionally expressive, become the canvas for these unacknowledged inner battles. If a man suppresses his own need for connection, he may accuse her of being needy. If he denies his inner chaos, he may call her unstable. If he fears losing control, her spontaneity will feel threatening. And if he avoids his own grief, her tears will seem manipulative rather than sacred. What he misreads is not her truth. It is his own discomfort with what she reflects. The feminine in woman does not conspire to confuse him. Rather, it holds up a mirror. Her emotion is not an attack, it is a message. Her intuition is not illogical, it is another form of knowing. Her emotional complexity is not a flaw. It is a depth he has not yet explored in himself. When a man feels overwhelmed by a woman's presence, it is often because she mirrors the parts of his own soul that he has yet to make peace with. Her unpredictability challenges his rigid structures. Her vulnerability challenges his pride. Her depth challenges his detachment. She is not trying to control him, she is simply being. Until a man sees this, he will continue to misread the women in his life, projecting onto them his own blind spots and calling it truth. Love, in its purest form, is not the merging of fantasies, but the meeting of truths. Carl Jung knew this well. He taught that all meaningful relationships demand transformation, and that the path to true intimacy requires more than affection. It requires alchemy. not the transmutation of metals, but the transmutation of the soul. In alchemical terms, love begins in projection, the nigredo, the dark stage. The man sees in the woman what he has forgotten in himself: beauty, mystery, emotion, grace. She becomes his muse, his savior, his ideal. This is not evil, it is natural. But it is not yet love. It is illusion, born from the unconscious, sweetened by longing. Eventually, the illusion cracks. The woman fails to be the goddess he imagined. She reveals her shadows, her needs, her autonomy. For the man, this moment can feel like betrayal. But in truth, it is a gift, a chance to awaken. This is the albedo, the whitening, when light enters the darkness, when the man begins to see not a symbol, but a soul. If he resists, he clings to the dream and grows bitter. If he accepts, he undergoes transformation. He no longer seeks to possess, to decode, or to save. Instead, he listens, he observes, he relinquishes control. This is the rubido, the reddening, the union of opposites, the sacred marriage of conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, self and other. In this space, love is no longer based on need but on presence. The man no longer demands that the woman fulfill what he has denied in himself. He brings wholeness to the relationship, rather than extracting it from her. The woman, too, is freed from the burden of expectation. She is no longer a dream or a danger. She is a partner, a mirror, a companion in becoming. Jung called this the conjunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites. It is not perfection but integration. It is not romance as escape, but love as revelation. In such a bond, there is space for contradiction, for silence, for pain, and for ecstasy. Nothing needs to be fixed because nothing is broken. There is only growth. There is only seeing. Love becomes what it was always meant to be, not a cure for loneliness, but a practice of presence. Not the end of longing, but the beginning of understanding. In a world driven by speed, noise, and superficial connection, true understanding has become a quiet revolution. Carl Jung's work was not about fixing the world outside, but about turning inward, to the realm of the soul, the unconscious, the archetypal. And if there is a revolution men must begin today, it is not one of conquest, but of perception. A revolution in how they see women, and through that, how they see themselves. When a man steps out of projection and into presence, everything changes. No longer does he enter a relationship seeking completion. No longer does he measure a woman by her ability to reflect his ego or soothe his wounds. Instead, he comes as a witness, awake, grounded, and responsible for his inner world. He begins to see the woman not as an answer to his longing, but as a soul with her own storm, her own rhythm, her own light. This shift is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with noise. It happens in moments, in listening instead of analyzing, in allowing instead of controlling, in honoring difference instead of demanding sameness. The man who has done the inner work does not flinch in the presence of feminine intensity. He does not run from her silence or fear her tears. He meets her, not as an outsider trying to invade, but as an equal daring to understand. The revolution is not in the outer behavior, it is in the gaze. When a man sees with soul, he no longer views the feminine as a puzzle or a threat. He sees her as sacred, not in the sense of fragile perfection, but in the sense of depth, complexity, and divine contradiction. She no longer needs to justify her ways, because he no longer demands they mirror his. This new way of seeing dissolves centuries of distortion. It dismantles the need to categorize, label, and possess. It creates space for truth, for beauty, for shared evolution. And in this space, love becomes more than attraction or chemistry. It becomes a practice of mutual unveiling, a journey not toward comfort, but toward reality. What Jung offered was not a map to women's hearts, but a compass toward self-awareness. For only when a man truly sees does he truly love. Even after all exploration, all reflection, all peeling back of archetypes and projections, one truth stands unshaken: the feminine remains a mystery. Not a mystery in the sense of confusion or darkness, but in the older, sacred sense of the word, a reality too vast, too fluid, too eternal to be fully contained by reason. Carl Jung never claimed that man could completely comprehend woman, nor did he believe that woman could entirely understand man. For understanding in its purest form is not a conquest of the mind, it is a reverence of the soul. In the meeting between two people, especially between the masculine and the feminine, there will always be an element that escapes analysis, that refuses to be named. And this, perhaps, is not a flaw, but a grace. The mystery is not a wall, it is a doorway. It invites awe, humility, and a kind of sacred curiosity. To love a woman is not to solve her, to possess her, or to mold her into something known. It is to witness her unfolding, again and again, without needing to define her. It is to sit in the presence of something ancient, something archetypal, something that speaks to a place in man that he has long forgotten. When a man stops asking, "What does she mean?" and begins asking, What does she reveal in me? A deeper path begins. He learns to listen, not just to her words, but to his reactions. He learns to question not her mystery, but his assumptions. He learns that love is not clarity without effort, but clarity born through the tension of opposites. This is where projection dies and relationship is born, not in the perfect alignment of personalities, but in the shared willingness to grow, to see, to hold space for what is unknown, to stand before the other not as a seeker of completion, but as a bearer of wholeness. And so the work continues, not just in understanding women, but in understanding the unseen landscape that lives within the self. For as Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside, awakes. Let this be an invitation to see, not to grasp, to love, not to label, to walk beside mystery, not to conquer it. Let this be the beginning of seeing her, not with the eyes of need, but with the depth of soul. If this reflection stirred something within you, it is because the journey has already begun. Subscribe, not for answers, but for deeper questions. Comment, not to debate, but to reflect. And listen, not only to the world, but to the silence within you. In the end, it is not about understanding women. It is about understanding what it means to see.